trading. It was basically, he wasn't taking anything that AIPAC should have been given to our wonderful ally Israel anyway. He was taking stuff that was really geared to things that had nothing to do with Israel, that Israel then used to trade to get to add to its population with Soviet immigrants. So that's one of the reasons. But again, I don't see in this day and age that, since most people don't know who he was, and because the investigation was so stunted, I mean, he was operating out of a safe house that was provided by one of the larger U.S.-Israel technology and business exchange organizations called the BIRD Foundation. And, you know, as an FBI investigator in the trenches, looking at all of this, they would have said, well, why aren't we raiding all of these organizations? And yet the investigation was stunted. And, of course, as you've mentioned before, they never found out who actually gave Pollard the file numbers to retrieve and then take into this BIRD safe house here in Washington to photocopy and then return. So, like a lot of investigations, you know, the key to all of this has been, as I mentioned before, intertwine all of these foundations and lobbies together and then intertwine them to the extent possible with the intelligence community. And pretty soon, nobody wants to take any of these investigations too far because they'll wind up hurting higher-ups and people who are, you know, somehow related to them. So, you know, it's a real problem. It really poisons politics in this town.
All right, sorry, Grant. I got problems here, man. I don't know what's wrong. Hey, there's the music. There's the music. Sorry for the dead air, y'all. I don't know what the hell's up with my connection here, but anyway, we're going to talk about Mega, Jonathan Pollard's handler, with Grant F. Smith when we get back from this break. Sorry for the cluster screw up here.
What's up next? Visit the Liberty Radio Network program guide to find out at shows.lrn.fm. That's shows.lrn.fm.
Yeah, that's all I feel like doing is laying around listening to some Poison Idea, man. Half hour more of this. Luckily, though, I got Grant Smith on the phone. Grant F. Smith, that is, from the Institute for Research, Middle East Policy. You can also find him at original.antiwar.com/Smith-Grant. It's got to be an easier way to work that out. Anyway, so we're going out to break, and I was screwing up. And I don't know if my mic was off or I lost my internet connection or what the hell happened. But so you were talking, Grant, about how when Jonathan Pollard was busted, that it was clear that he was receiving instructions of what to steal. For example, he knew where to look for which documents to take and that kind of thing. And there was a Bamford article, James Bamford, the heroic James Bamford, author of 3 books about the National Security Agency as well as A Pretext for War. And he wrote an article that I think was in the Washington Post back then about how there was an Israeli spy or a group of Israeli spies known as Mega. And these were the people who, when you talked about Ben-Ami Kadish there a little bit, this was the same Mega that was his handler. Who is Mega, Grant? Do you know?
No, we always come back to this. But, you know, my question these days is really, who isn't Mega? I mean, who isn't feeding either AIPAC or feeding, the intelligence of Israel with information? Because, you know, these are key questions that anybody needs to ask. I don't have a guess as to who is giving the file numbers to Pollard, but I do know that there are a lot of things that we're never going to know. As we've talked about before, I've been doing a lot of research into U.S. Diversion of technology and uranium to Israel. Right. And yet, in filing Freedom of Information Act requests, there's a fascinating book called The Bomb in the Basement, which says that Henry Morgenthau Jr., who was the Treasury Secretary back in the day, was also helping finance the Israeli nuclear weapons program, and I thought that was very interesting. But we just missed that. Our Freedom of Information Act request came back saying that all of the internal security files on him were destroyed in 2008. So we'll never know what, he would have been kind of a mega in the early days for doing something that was blatantly illegal against the U.S. interests, and yet we probably had a lot of information about that that's lost to history. And another thing, just from a research perspective, in trying to find the new megas of tomorrow, there's a lot of open lobbying that takes place in the Department of Justice, whether it's Free Stuart Nozzetti, who was caught in a sting by the FBI, offering to become a Mossad agent, and he was a nuclear level security clearance NASA person before he left that organization. The Department of Justice won't release any of their Office of the Pardon Attorney records on third-party correspondence lobbying for them to release either Pollard or Nozzetti. They send back a response saying that unless you can prove an immediate need, that they won't respond to Freedom of Information Act requests, which means that these processes are almost completely hidden from the public or from watchdog organizations that want to know about how these backroom deals are cut. And they even, in fact, cite a case of the ACLU against the DOJ about why they can drag their heels until the dirty deeds are actually done. There was a court case. The ACLU had the money to take the DOJ to court, which was probably, a disappointing thing for them. But at any rate, so, whether it's MAGA or whether it's people inside government or powerful individuals lobbying for clemency for some pretty horrific acts against their fellow countrymen, the level of secrecy around all of this stuff really preserves the sort of impunity with which, the lobby can operate in this country. And that's probably the most frustrating thing, but it's also, one of the reasons why this work is so interesting, because it's certainly not being done by any so-called investigative journalists.
Yeah, not many anyway. Well, Phil Giraldi, our previous guest, I know you were listening to that interview, but I guess it was probably the last time I interviewed Phil, was in regards to a piece that he did for the American Conservative about Israeli spies posing as CIA and trying to recruit Muslims in America to do God knows what. Is that the kind of thing that goes on typically?
Well, he has more information about that than I do, but I do note that the FBI at the same time was posing as Mossad agents to recruit Americans sympathetic to Israel in exactly the same way. So
that was to trick them and prosecute them, presumably, right?
Yeah, that was to trick them and prosecute them, and we'll probably never know why the Mossad was trying to get some of these Arab Americans. I didn't notice whether they were trying to implicate them in something, but it does indicate a level of intelligence activity in this country that I'd certainly like to find out more about.
Yeah, well, it's like Christopher Ketchum wrote in his great piece in Counterpunch about Israeli spying in America. It begins with scratch a CIA agent, and he'll start telling you about how much he hates Israel. And, I asked Phil about that, I think, probably in that last interview. Like, why do all you CIA guys hate Israel so much? Think of Ray McGovern, or, hate is a strong word, but whatever. And of course, the answer was because people in the CIA actually know what's going on in our relationship with Israel, as opposed to the rest of us who basically get our news from television in this country. People at the CIA, they understand the relationship between America and Israel, and they don't like it.
Well, yeah, any analyst who's forced to look at the actual situation of a small country in the Middle East that offers the U.S. nothing but is almost entirely dependent on the U.S., it must be more difficult for them, unlike the majority of Americans, to stomach this constant barrage about how this is such a wonderful ally and how much they do for us, because it's obviously not true, and anybody who's done their homework knows that it's not true. So I would assume that there would be a little bit more rank, or especially given the fact that they do know more. I mean, the Central Intelligence Agency is sitting on a gigantic case file that we're still trying to get about the New Mex case of the diversion of 300 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium from Pennsylvania. So they know what the relationship's really about, and yet. Again, we've got all of these organizations that won't let this information out. And you, in fact, I think you're going to be surprised in a couple of months, because you put me onto something during our last interview that I hadn't thought of, and it turns out that you're right. But I'm not even going to tell you what you're right about, so think about that.
All right, well, I guess I'll just have to wait patiently to find out.
Maybe you'll have me back on again and we can talk about it. But it's worth...
everybody? Grant Smith says I'm right about something.
Yeah, well, no, you're right about a lot of things, but, whenever you assume the worst, you're usually on the right track in this relationship. So, again, if we find out at 5 p.m. today that Pollard's on his way to Tel Aviv in exchange for 2 months of phony settlement freezes, and then we'll know something else.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking at this thing from Sarasota Springs, Utah, ABC 4 News. Return of the Israeli art student spies. Why are a bunch of Israeli art students walking around in the Salt Lake City area pretending to be art students? Could it possibly have anything to do with the massive new National Security Agency Center being built there? And how transparent can you get? We remember the last time there were a bunch of Israeli art student spies in this country, and I don't think we like it very much, right?
Well, that's still an operation that, art students going into DEA and other facilities that, unless it was related to the massive ecstasy exports that come from Israel to the United States, I'm not sure what that was about. And
well, we're going to have to leave it there because we're all out of music playing here. But I'll just tell everybody, go read The Shadow Factory by James Bamford. You want to know about Israel and the National Security Agency. That thing will blow your mind. And please check out IRMEP, I-R-M-E-P, the Institute for Research, Middle East Policy. Grant F. Smith, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Scott.